Welcome, gentle listener. Tonight, you'll travel far into the lands of Middle-earth, to a time before the War of the Ring, before Gondor stood proud, before even the last alliance of elves and men. You will walk the green halls of Erin Norruin, the evergreen forest of the west, where silver leaves whisper lullabies, and the moonlight sings in ancient tongues. And there, you will meet two beings unlikely to share breath, a young wounded drake and the elven healer who refused to kill him. This story is a tale of friendship and loss, of nature and fire, and of the bittersweet beauty and choices that echo through ages. Now let us enter the song of the forest and the flame that would not die. In the hush of a twilight, not yet kissed by stars, the silver-boughed trees of Erin Norruin stood still, as if the forest itself held its breath. And through the soft green shadows, the sound of a harp-string wind drifted between moss-laden trunks and fern-covered glades where ancient stones lay half-swallowed by time. The birds had ceased their songs, and even the streams ran slower, as though wary of something foreign that bled its heat into the roots of the world. And it was beneath this quiet veil that Elenwen, healer of the third circle and speaker of bird tongues, stepped silently over a fallen log, her fingers brushing aside a vine heavy with dew, her eyes narrowed in concern. For the trees had spoken to her in dreams the night before. They had wept sap and whispered of smoke, and there it was, the scent of it, thick and strange. Not the wild scent of campfire or lightning-struck oak, but something heavier, like molten iron and scorched bone. She pressed a hand to the earth, felt the tremble in its skin, not from hoof or footstep, but something slower. And then came the cry, not loud, but deep, like a bell tolling beneath water. A cry of pain, of ancient sorrow, and without thought Elenwen moved toward it. She passed a grove where moonflowers had not opened, past roots twisted in strange patterns, and then the trees opened like a breath held too long, and she stood at the edge of a ruined dell where moss-covered stone bore dwarvish carvings long forgotten, their halls collapsed by root and rain. But the ruin was not what stilled her heart. It was the heap at its center, blackened and smoking, curled upon itself with wings torn and limbs trembling, eyes closed in agony. A dragon, no older than a fledgling, its scales a deep copper, edged with dim ember glow. As if flame still lived beneath the soot, she did not scream nor flee, though her hands trembled. She felt no malice, no shadow of the great worms of terror told in the songs. This was not a Smaug, nor a Scatha, nor one of Morgoth's fire-birthed monstrosities. This was something else, wounded, afraid, perhaps even alone. The creature shifted, one wing twitching with a ragged tear down its membrane, its breath shallow, nostrils glowing faintly with each exhale, and when it opened its eye, only one, for the other was sealed shut by a burn. It met hers, not with hunger, but confusion and pain. Elenwen knelt slowly, as if approaching a deer with an arrow in its flank, and began to speak, not in Westron nor in Sindarin, but in the old tongue of the trees, the language of wind and leaf, soothing syllables like rustling branches, like morning rain. And though the creature could not understand her words, something in her tone must have reached it. For it did not strike, did not retreat, only watched her, unblinking, unbreathing. "I will not harm you," she whispered, though she knew not if it could grasp the meaning, and gently she reached into her satchel, withdrew a vial of healing, balm made from the sap of the Miralin tree, and touched it to a burn along the beast's foreleg. At first, nothing, Then a twitch, then a soft, low rumble from its throat, neither warning nor threat, but something almost like a sigh. Night deepened, and stars bloomed one by one above the canopy, casting dappled light into the dell. She stayed with it, speaking, softly, tending each wound she could see, though many were beyond her skill. Sometime near midnight, it fell into sleep, coiled like a flame banked against the cold, and she dared to sit beside it, her back to its side, listening to the slow thump of its heart. Deep as a mountain drum, she did not know what the morrow would bring, whether the council would condemn her for sheltering such a being, whether the creature would wake in pain and fury. But for now, beneath starlight and the ancient songs of leaves, there was only the quiet between breaths and the strange warmth of fire that did not burn. Elenwen closed her eyes, lulled by the pulse of something old and sorrowful beside her, and in sleep she dreamed not of fear, but of a world where flame and forest might yet share the same wind. And above them, high in the branches, a nightjar watched in silence, its feathers catching the glow of emberlight, as if the forest itself had sent a witness to mark the moment when fire met grace. Name of the wild. The morning came like a slow blooming flower, with sunlight filtered through silver leaves and birdsong woven into the breath of the trees. But in the ruined dell, it was not the sun that stirred Elenwen from her rest, but the shift of warm scales. Beneath her, the low rumble of a waking breath, and the scent of coal and moss mingling in the air like incense. She opened her eyes and for a moment forgot where she was, until the sight of the dragon's flank beside her brought memory flooding back. Not fear, not panic, only awe, as if she'd wandered into an old poem and forgotten the rhyme. The dragon was watching her, head low, eyes slitted but calm, and she noticed now the subtle patterns of its coppery scales, veins of orange like rivers in autumn leaves, glowing faintly as though the light within was returning. It did not growl, did not shift to rise, only blinked slowly, as if puzzled by her presence, and she wondered what it saw in her. A predator? A caretaker? A curious leaf drifting too close to fire? She sat up, stretching gently, careful not to startle it, and reached into her pouch again, not for balm this time, but for a strip of dried fruit wrapped in a sunleaf. She laid it on the stone between them, then sat back and waited. The dragon tilted its head, nostrils flaring, then, almost shyly, extended a forked tongue and drew the offering into its mouth, chewing slowly, thoughtfully, as if tasting not only food, but intention. Elenwen smiled, soft and small, and began to speak, not to command, but to share, her voice low and melodic, telling the creature about the forest, about the myrrelin trees that hummed in the wind, the glass-bloom flowers that only opened for moonlight, the way deer would dance in the rain when they thought no one watched. Her words flowed like a stream, unhurried, soothing, and though the dragon made no reply, it did not turn away, its gaze fixed on her with the intensity of a storm kept at bay. "You need a name," she said at last, brushing a strand of silver gold. Hair behind her ear, her eyes distant as if seeking it among the branches above. Something not of fear nor of fire, but of what you are becoming. Not a beast of war, but something else. Something old, and yet new. The dragon exhaled, a long breath that stirred her hair like a breeze, and she felt it, a ripple in the air, like the forest leaning closer to listen, as if the act of Naming was no small thing, but a ritual, a rite of passage older than stone. She placed a hand upon its snout, just between the ridges of scale where warmth pulsed faintly, and whispered, "Thilion." The name hung in the air, soft and strange, an elven word not often spoken. It meant little spark beneath the moon, a word used in lullabies and old forest stories. And as she said it, the dragon blinked slowly, then let out a sound. Not a growl, not a roar, but something like a breath turned to music, deep and low, as though testing the name's weight in its chest. Thilion, she repeated it, smiling, and the forest around them seemed to echo it, not aloud, but in light and silence, in the way the leaves shimmered and the branches swayed ever so slightly. For 3 days, Elenwen stayed in the dell, nursing the dragon, singing songs of healing, reading aloud from scrolls of lore while Thilion listened, his great copper head resting beside her feet, eyes half-lidded with calm. She learned his moods not through words, but through breath and posture, through the twitch of a tail or the flicker of his internal glow. And in turn, he learned the sound of her laughter, the rhythm of her speech, the smell of her hands, until he no longer tensed at her approach, and once even nuzzled her cloak as she mended a torn wing, but it could not last forever. On the 4th morning, a hawk with feathers the color of frost landed on a branch above them, its eyes gleaming with knowledge not its own, and Elenwen felt a cold twist in her heart. For the hawk was a messenger of the Highwooden, and where it flew, word would follow. She knew then that her time in secrecy was ending, that others would come, and not all would see Thilion as she did. That night, she sat beside him one last time, her voice barely above a whisper, as she told him the story of Eärendil, the mariner, who bore a star upon his brow, and of dragons slain not with blades but with hope. And when she finished, Thilion turned his great head and pressed it gently against her side, the ember glow of his scales bathing her in soft warmth, a farewell. Or a beginning, she did not yet know. But the forest held its breath again, and in the hush between heartbeats, Elenwen whispered into the night, "Whatever comes, you are not a monster, you are Thilion." And far above, where stars blinked like old eyes, something unseen stirred and remembered the name. Ashen Petal. The days that followed moved like water beneath ice, silent and slow, yet shimmering with quiet life, for though the dell remained hidden from all but the stars, it had become a sanctuary of strange companionship. Thilion, the dragon once cloaked in smoke and pain, now stirred with gentler fire, and Elenwen, the elven healer once devoted only to silence and duty, found her mornings filled with new rituals. The soft brush of moss along scale, the careful mixing of herbs for wounds that no scroll had ever named, the telling of stories to ears that listened without judgment or haste. Each morning she would wake before the first birdsong, when the forest wore its silver shawl of mist, and gathered dew from the petals of the twin blossoms that grew along the dell's northern edge. Thilion would watch, unmoving but alert, his breath steaming softly in the chill dawn, his eye bright with quiet interest. And though he did not speak, Elenwen could feel the questions beneath his gaze, the way a child might gaze upon fireflies for the first time, unsure if they were creatures or falling stars. She began to speak aloud her thoughts, not for his understanding, but because the silence between them felt now like a sacred thing, a space not empty, but full of things too delicate for speech. Still, she filled it anyway, telling him of her childhood in Lorien, of the song her mother once sang to call the deer to stillness, of the way leaves sound different when they fall from joy instead of sorrow. Thilion would respond with subtle shifts, a slow curling of his tail, the low vibration in his chest like a cat's purr wrapped in thunder one twilight. When the sky wore the colors of fading fire, she brought him a gift, a harp of willow and moon thread, strung with fine gut and enchanted to never warp in rain, and she placed it on a stone near his side. She said nothing, only let her fingers touch the strings once, sending out a single, trembling note that shimmered through the dell like a ripple on still water. Thilion blinked slowly, then leaned in, his breath warm against her hand as she played another note, then another, until a soft melody wove itself between them. A lullaby, ancient and wordless, a tune passed down from tree to tree long before elves ever walked the wood. And as she played, something changed in Thilion's glow. His scales brightened slightly, a shimmer of gold beneath the copper, like a hearth newly stirred. And from deep within his throat came a sound so low and warm it seemed the earth itself had sighed. They sat that way until the stars emerged, not moving, the song still trembling faintly on the air, like a memory unwilling to fade in those days. Elenwen began to sketch him in her leaf journal, quiet lines drawn with gentle charcoal, capturing the curve of his wing, the pattern of his eye ridges, the way light flickered in the small gaps between his scales, like fireflies trapped in amber. She titled the first page not Beast or Worm, but simply Thilion Flamekind, and she pressed a dried twin blossom into the fold beside it, a mark of peace. But shadows, like vines left unchecked, grow quietly. It was the birds who warned her, not with song but silence. One morning she noticed the sparrows no longer danced near the glade, and the crows, old watchers of the wood, had begun to circle wide, never landing, never calling. Even the wind, once playful, now passed. Through the dell, with the hush of a question left unanswered, Elenwen did not speak of it to Thilion, but she knew what it meant. Others had caught the scent not of smoke, but of something forbidden. She had not asked leave of the Highwarden to heal a dragon, and while she had broken no oath, she had bent tradition, and in elven memory, such things bend like frost on a branch, silent until the snap. That night she did not sleep. Instead, she played her harp beneath the stars, and Thilion curled close, his head resting beside her lap, a soft ember glow flickering from his nostrils with each breath. She sang not of peace this time, but of choice, of roads split by wind, of stars that chose to fall rather than fade. And Thilion in his way answered, not in song but in stillness so deep it felt like trust. She placed her hand on his forehead and whispered, "I will not let them unmake what you are becoming." The wind did not answer, but far in the distance, beyond the reach of trees, a horn sounded once, faint and slow. The world was coming, and the dell, once silent and sacred, now seemed too small to hold what stirred in its heart. Council of Silence. The forest had always spoken to Elenwen in the quiet ways. In the hush before a rain, the rustle of ivy against bark, the creak of roots stretching beneath the soil. And for years, she had learned to listen with more than ears, to read the moods of trees like the faces of old friends. But now, as she walked the winding path toward the halls of the inner circle, the forest said nothing, not even in farewell. Not a leaf stirred. Not a bird called, not even the wind offered her comfort. As though the woods themselves had drawn in their breath and turned away, she wore her healer's robes of mooncloth and shadow thread, pale against the deep green of Erin Norwin's sacred paths, and in her hands she carried nothing, not her harp, not her satchel of balm or songflowers, only the weight of truth heavy in her chest, and the memory of Thilian's breath warm against her hands that morning as she whispered, "Wait for me," and saw his eye blink once, slow and trusting. The halls were built into the earth beneath the roots of the 7 eldest trees, and no sound echoed there, only the voice of those who spoke in judgment. 12 seats carved from living wood, each occupied by an elder, whose face bore the stillness of stone carved in shadow. Among them, Hyward Gallaneth, whose silver crown of woven bark and light had not changed in 1,000 years, and whose eyes held the weight of every choice that had ever been made and remembered. She bowed low, as tradition demanded, but did not lower her gaze. "Elenwen," Gallaneth said, and even her name sounded like a leaf falling without breeze. "You have been absent from the circles of council. You have turned from the moon paths. You have walked alone. Tell us why." There was no anger in the voice, no accusation, only the calm certainty that something had shifted, and now it must be named. Elenwen stepped forward, her breath slow, her heart steady only by will. "I have found something, someone," she said, her voice low but clear. "A creature not of shadow, though born in flame, a young dragon, wounded near the dwarven ruins. I tended his injuries. I gave him a name." A ripple passed through the circle, too small to see, but present. An old tension stirred like dust beneath a closed door. "A dragon," murmured Elder Farron, whose eyes had never blinked without reason. "And you chose to shelter it, feed it, name it." "He was not a threat," Elenwen said softly. "He was alone, dying, no more monstrous than a wolf with a thorn in its paw." "Do you forget the scars of the north?" said Maelier, whose twin sons had died in the fires of the Grey Mountains. "Do you forget what they are? What they will always become?" "I do not forget," she said, and her voice trembled now, not with fear but with sorrow. "But I also remember the tales older than fear, of the flame walkers who sang to the stars before they were hunted, of the emberkin who kept balance in the mountains before they were driven mad by war. This one is not like those. He is young, he listens, he dreams." Silence followed, deep and long. At last Gallaneth spoke, her gaze unblinking, her voice cold as moonlight on steel. "You have broken the covenant of separation. You have brought fire into our sanctuary. You have allowed it to live beneath the boughs of the eldest oaks. What do you offer in penance?" Elenwen looked up, her hands at her sides, palms open. "My penance is my choice. I will leave the circle. I will take him away. I ask only safe passage for us both. No pursuit, no harm. Let us go." Again silence, but this time not of thought but of choice unspoken. Elder Thandil, who had not spoken in centuries, leaned forward, her voice a whisper of falling leaves. "And if he turns, then I will turn with him," Elenwen said. "If he falls to shadow, I will not run." "But he will not. I have seen the light in his sleep." The council murmured, quiet as roots shifting beneath stone, and Gallaneth raised a single hand. The air stilled. "You have until the next full moon," she said. "After that, the greenwood will not be your shield. Your bond is your burden. Go." Elenwen bowed once more, though now her heart beat fast, for the words had not been yes or no, but something in between. A corridor opened, but already closing. She left the hall without a word more. And the forest felt different now, no longer silent but strained, like a harpstring pulled too tight, ready to snap. She walked quickly, heart pounding, feet barely touching the ground, and by the time she reached the dell again, Thilian was already waiting, his wings half spread, his eye bright with alertness, as if he had known. She knelt before him, hands pressed to his forehead. "We must go," she whispered. "Not now, but soon. They will not stop us. Not yet." He let out a breath that warmed her to her bones, and his head lowered beside hers, the glow of his scales now soft and pulsing like the rhythm of a quiet drum. And though no word passed between them, Elenwen knew, wherever they went next, it would not be the forest that held them, but the fire and faith they carried together. Far above, the moon rose silver and slow, and the countdown had begun. Flight beneath the stars. The moon had barely begun her climb when Elenwen rose from her resting place beside Thilian, her cloak heavy with the dew of farewell, her hands steady though her heart swayed like a candle in wind. Around them, the dell slept beneath starlight. The twin blossoms closed, the roots curled in dreaming silence, and yet the air hummed with something old, an ending or a beginning, she could not say. Thilian lifted his head as she moved, his eye catching hers, and in it she saw no fear, only readiness. His wounds had healed enough that he could walk now without limping, and the fire in his chest no longer flickered weakly, but glowed with steady light, like coals banked beneath careful ash. Still, she had not seen him fly, and the thought of it filled her with both wonder and worry. She gathered her things, a satchel of herbs, a folded map inked in elven moon runes, a flask of dew water enchanted to never empty, and ran her fingers once across the strings of her willow harp, letting it sound a single soft note, a farewell whispered not just to place, but to the peace they had built beneath these trees. "We go west," she whispered, brushing her fingers along Thilian's jaw, where the scar had faded but not vanished. "The old paths through the roots of the hills, toward the blue mountains. There are caverns there where even the Highwarden's sight cannot reach." Thilian breathed low and warm, his wings twitching slightly, testing their strength against the night. Elenwen reached up and laid a palm against his shoulder, felt the thrum of muscle and heat, and whispered the old word of journey. "Navair, not goodbye, but go in shadow and return in light." They moved through the forest like wind and flame. Elenwen, ahead with her moon pendant glowing faintly to guide her, Thilian behind, silent but immense, his copper scales catching glints of starlight like hidden embers. They avoided the high paths where watchers might linger, and walked instead through rootways and fern-covered hollows, where ancient trees grew so tightly the stars barely touched the ground. Hours passed in hush and hush again. Once they heard the call of an owl that did not belong, a signal perhaps, and Elenwen stilled, pressing her hand to Thilian's flank until the silence resumed. Another time they passed beneath a tree older than names, its trunk carved with symbols half swallowed by moss, and she whispered a prayer there, asking for safe passage and for the fire beside her to remain guided, not consumed. They reached the edge of the greenwood just as the moon crested its peak, and ahead stretched the wildlands, rolling hills, broken stone, and far beyond, the blue-shadowed rise of the mountains whose name no longer passed easily among elves. The air changed there, crisp with cold and space, and Thilian paused, his wings twitching again. Elenwen turned and looked up at him, her voice soft but sure. "If you try to fly, let it be now, where no branches catch you, where the sky is wide, enough to forgive your fall." For a long moment he did not move. Then with a low growl like thunder behind velvet, he crouched, spread his wings, still patched with her healing salves but whole, and leapt. The wind caught him with a cry, and for the first time Thilion flew not high, not graceful, not yet. His wings wobbled, his balance faltered, but he held and rose and caught the wind again, soaring low above the ground as Elenwen ran beneath him, her laughter quiet but real, tears streaking her cheeks as she watched him rise like a spark unbound. He circled once, twice, then dipped low beside her, matching her stride with a glide that stirred her cloak and lifted her hair. "You were never meant to stay beneath," she whispered to the stars. Not sure if she meant him or herself, together they crossed into the wildlands, past the final border, tree where silver leaves no longer grew, and into the forgotten country beyond the sight of elves. Above them, the stars shone brighter now, as if to guide or perhaps to witness, and neither forest nor council stood between them and what came. Next, but far behind, beyond hill and root, a second owl called once more, and somewhere in the trees a silent rider turned their horse westward. The Icefang. The wind that slid down from the blue mountains was no longer friendly. It bit with quiet teeth and tasted of stone and snow long buried. And as Elenwen pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, she felt the weight of the land change beneath her feet. This was no longer forest nor meadow, but a place of echo and hush, where the earth itself held breath and time moved slower, colder, older. Thilion walked now, his wings folded tight to his sides, the light within his chest dimmed, for warmth's sake, and though he did not complain, Elenwen saw how each step pressed heavier than the last, how his breath misted long in the air, how frost clung to the edges of his wounded scales where her salves could not reach. Still they pressed on, westward and upward, toward a cleft in the mountains marked on no map, known only through songs half sung and riddles passed by dwarves. In fireside tales, the Deep Vein it was once called, a forgotten pass where gems once whispered in the rock and dwarven kings dreamt beneath their halls, until something stirred deep below, and the tunnels were sealed not with stone, but with silence. They reached it at dusk, the sky the color of old bruises, the air heavy with snow not yet fallen, and Elenwen paused before the threshold. A narrow split in the rock, framed by ancient pillars carved with runes worn smooth by wind and time. She placed her hand upon the stone and whispered the word for permission, and the mountain gave no reply. Only the cold deepened. Thilion entered first, his glow faint but present, casting long amber shadows along the cavern walls. Elenwen followed, her pendant glowing softly to guide her steps, and the sound of their passage, soft breath, claw against stone, cloak brushing old dust, was swallowed almost at once, as though the mountain had no wish to remember them. They moved slowly, through narrow halls and low tunnels, past broken stairs and doorways sealed with cave-ins, and deeper still where the walls began to shimmer with veins of silver and frost glass. It was then, as they passed beneath a great domed vault carved with forgotten star lore, that Thilion froze. Elenwen stopped beside him, her breath catching in her throat, for the air had changed. It was colder, yes, but more than that, it was. Watching from the far end of the vault came a sound, not a growl, not a breath, but a deep, slow shifting like glaciers dreaming in their sleep. Then a pulse of air, heavy and stale, and the sharp scent of frost-burnt bone. Elenwen reached for her harp, not to play but to touch, to steady her hands, to remind herself of song. Thilion lowered himself instinctively, wings flaring slightly, his glow rising from coal to fire with sudden urgency, and then the shadows moved. It came not with a roar, but a creep, slow and massive, a shape half-formed in mist and cold, wings curled like jagged icebergs, horns long as spears, eyes pale as moonlit snow, and a mouthful of teeth like broken glass. The Ice Fang, one of the old drakes left behind when Morgoth fell, too cold for fire, too slow for flight, but vast, cunning, and cruel. It did not speak in words, but its thoughts pressed against theirs like frost on bare skin, deep and slow and bitter. "You burn," it hissed into their bones. "You bring warmth into my sleep. Why?" Thilion did not retreat. He stood between Elenwen and the beast, his glow rising now like the first flare of dawn through smoke. And though his body trembled, he let out a growl that echoed across the stone, not in challenge, but in warning. Elenwen stepped beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, and whispered words not meant for dragons, but for wounds. Words of healing, of peace, of endings without hate, but the Ice Fang only laughed, a sound like a glacier cracking. "Too late," it whispered. "Your warmth has come too deep. Now I hunger again," and with a sudden lurch it surged forward. Thilion leapt, wings snapping wide, fire bursting from his chest in a great arc of golden light. But the flames struck frost, and steam filled the cavern in a scream of air and water, and heat. Elenwen stumbled back, coughing, her pendant flaring wildly as shadow and fire danced. The two dragons clashed, one of ice and age, the other of ember and promise, claw against scale, roar against silence, and the mountain shook with the memory of what it once feared. Thilion was smaller, weaker, still healing, but he was fast, and he burned with something the Ice Fang could not name: hope. At last, in a blinding burst of light, Thilion struck the old drake's neck with his tail, searing it with fire, and the beast recoiled, bellowing, ice mist pouring from its wounds as it retreated into the deeper dark. It was not a victory, only a pause. But it was enough. Thilion landed beside Elenwen, panting, his chest dimming, his wings trembling with the effort. She knelt beside him, laid her hand to his brow and whispered, "You flew." Again, her voice trembling not with fear but with awe. Behind them, the vault groaned. Ahead, a new path opened, half collapsed but passable, leading deeper toward the dwarven stairways that might yet carry them west. They did not speak, but walked side by side into the dark, where cold had not yet forgotten them, but where fire had begun to leave its mark. When fire weeps, the dwarven stairs wound downward like a spiral etched into the spine of the mountain, each step older than any kingdom still standing, worn smooth by time and dusted now with frost as fine as ash. And Elenwen moved through them with care, her fingers grazing the wall to steady herself, while behind her Thilion limped slightly, his wings scorched from where the Ice Fang's breath had grazed him, frostburn more painful than flame, but healing still. The passage narrowed ahead into a long, low corridor, walls carved with scenes of old dwarven triumphs, dragon kings slain by hammer and steel, fire sealed in stone, and at the end of the hall a broken gateway yawned wide into the mountain's heart, beyond which no map marked, no song dared name. Elenwen paused there, her breath catching not from the cold, but from the deep tremble she felt in the stone. not just below but around them, as though the mountain itself was holding its breath, aware of what walked once more through its bones. Thilion let out a low, guttural sound, not pain, not fear, but warning. Something moved behind them. A sound, faint at first, then louder. A scraping of stone, the groan of shifting weight, the hiss of breath through sharpened ice. The ice fang was not dead. It had circled, burrowed, hunted. And now it came again, hungrier, enraged, and this time it would not test. It would consume. Elenwen turned just in time to see the shadow rise behind them, wings of broken crystal, eyes like moons without warmth, a mouth wide with frost and fury. And she cried out, not in fear but in defiance, raising her harp and striking its strings with sudden force, letting the sound ripple outward in a wave of pure, shimmering light. The note hit the ice fang like a slap of sunlight, blinding it for a moment. But only a moment. It surged forward. Thilion did not wait. With a roar that shook the stones around them, he lunged, his wings flaring, his glow rising from ember to blaze, and for the first time, Elenwen saw what he truly was. Not a fledgling, not a child, but fire unshackled. He opened his jaws and let loose a torrent of flame, not just heat but memory, heat from the beginning of the world, the warmth that woke the first stars. The ice fang screamed, the corridor filled with blinding light and ash and heat, and Elenwen was thrown to the ground, shielding her face as the air cracked and boiled. Stone melted in streaks along the walls, ancient carvings turned to slag, and the floor itself split beneath the force of it, creating a chasm between her and the flame. Then, silence. When the air cleared, the ice fang was gone. Only smoke remained, thick and slow, curling upward through the new wound in the earth. Thilion stood at the edge of the break, unmoving, steam rising from his scales, breath shallow, eyes dim. Elenwen ran to him, her heart breaking with each step. Thilion, she whispered, touching his side, too hot at first, then cooling quickly. You burned too deep. Too much. He turned his head slowly, his body trembling, and she saw the glow flickering within him, struggling to stay lit, like a dying candle. He had poured too much of himself into the fire, drawn on reserves that were not yet meant to be touched, and now he stood barely balanced between life and ash. She knelt before him, cupping his jaw in both hands, her tears steaming where they fell. You're not meant to die here, she said, her voice cracking. Not like this. Not for me. He made a sound, softer than any he'd ever made before, almost a hum, almost a lullaby, as if to say he would do it again. And then his legs gave way, and he collapsed into her arms, a mass of scale and heat and breath that now came slow, uncertain, small. She did not leave him. She sat in the shadow of that ruined hall, her harp forgotten, her pendant pulsing dimly, and cradled his head in her lap, while the mountain above trembled with the aftershock of fire that dared to defy the cold. There she sang to him, the lullaby she had once played in the dell, soft and slow and full of trembling light. And as her song spilled into the cracks of stone and silence, Thilion's breathing steadied, his glow faint but constant, the fire inside him too tired to dance, but not yet ready to fade. And when she looked up at last, she saw not ruin, but a path opened where none had been before. A tunnel lit faintly, by the heat of Thilion's flame, leading not downward but through, toward something new, toward the edge of the world, toward the end, or the beginning, of the story they had dared to write in fire and song. Songs of the Emberborn. Years passed like mist across the face of the moon, and the tale of the healer and the flame was slowly swallowed by time, like so many soft things in a world too often hardened by stone and shadow. The dell where they once lay is now overgrown, the twin blossoms blooming only in winter, and though the council speaks no more of dragons, the elders still pause when the fire crackles just so, and the wind hums a note they cannot name, but far beyond the greenwood. Past the hills and into the folded arms of the blue mountains, where stone still remembers the shape of ancient wings, there is a place untouched by map or mark, a glade hidden within the bones of the world, where warmth never leaves the ground, and strange flowers bloom from ash. It was there that the child found it, an elf child, no more than 10 seasons, wandering beyond where their watch was meant to end, chasing a moth that glowed like starlight. They stumbled through a veil of ivy, through a crack in the cliffside, and into stillness. At first, they thought it a dream. The glade shimmered with soft heat, not burning but cradling, and at its center, rising from stone and soot, was a tree, unlike any they had known. Its bark the color of old bronze, its leaves like fire frozen mid-flicker, and coiled beneath it, half swallowed by roots and time, a shape immense and still, a dragon, its wings folded, its eyes closed, its body fused with stone and ash and root, as though the forest had chosen not to bury it, but to keep it. The child approached slowly, breath held. They reached out and touched the dragon's brow, and it was warm. Then they saw her, a figure of light carved in the trunk of the ember tree. Elenwen, her form caught mid-song, her hands raised as if in blessing or farewell, her face etched not in grief, but in peace. The child sat beside the grate, held body and sang, not a song they had learned, but one that came unbidden, a lullaby of firelight and forest wind, of names whispered at the end of dreams, of things not lost but resting. And as the song filled the glade, a soft glow stirred. In the trees' leaves, not bright, not loud, just present, and somewhere deep beneath the stone, a heart answered once. They say now that the Emberborn still guard the pass, that travelers who lose their way in snow sometimes wake by a warm flame, with no firewood nearby. That when you play a harp beneath the stars in that mountain shadow, you can hear a low hum join in harmony, something vast and kind, wrapped in memory. And sometimes the wind will carry a name through the pines, Thilian or Elenwen or both, if you listen with a quiet heart. Not all fires fade. Some become stories, and some become songs. Thank you for listening to The Ember and the Evergreen. May your dreams be full of warm embers, quiet forests, and the gentle courage of those who love without fear. If this tale soothed your soul, please like, subscribe, or explore the playlist. For more ASMR bedtime stories from Middle-earth. There are many more songs still waiting to be sung. Sleep well, dear traveler. Good night.